A reserved girl named Emma Reed held no faith in destiny. She held fast to the idea of staying focused, putting in the effort, and navigating through the day without attracting notice. On a scorching Tuesday morning, as she paused to fix her shirt in the reflection of a shadowy car window, she remained unaware of the gaze fixed upon her from the other side of the glass, a gaze belonging to someone who would alter her entire perception of herself and the life she believed she was entitled to. Emma Reed strolled with her gaze cast downward, as though the burdens of her history were stitched into her very being. The morning sun had started its ascent, stretching long shadows from street signs and glinting off the surfaces of parked cars. Her jeans had grown threadbare at the knees, while the faded tank top clung uncomfortably to her figure in the sweltering early summer heat. She wasn't heading anywhere extraordinary, merely on her way to the diner for her morning shift, yet even for that, she desired to appear at least a bit presentable. She halted on the sidewalk, her gaze drawn to the sleek black car stationed at the corner. It gleamed with perfection, a high-end model she couldn't identify, the sort of vehicle that seemed out of place in this area. Yet, the windows were dark, resembling a mirror, and she instinctively moved closer to adjust the strap of her tank top that kept sliding down. Her reflection gazed back at her, a disheveled ponytail, subtle shadows beneath her eyes, devoid of any makeup. She placed her fingers on her shirt, made a slight adjustment, and for a fleeting instant, gazed into her own reflection. She pivoted and continued on her path. Unbeknownst to her, a figure lingered within the confines of the car, hidden behind the darkened glass. Edward Montgomery remained perfectly still. He sat there for some time, the engine silent, his phone resting face down on the seat next to him. He didn't belong here, with no appointment on the calendar, no genuine purpose for navigating this section of the city. Yet, there was a certain freedom found in the absence of the polished surfaces and sleek ascents of his reality, allowing him to truly inhale the moment. That morning, he had parked absent-mindedly, merely seeking to clear his thoughts. And then she emerged. He observed that she didn't glance around to check who was in the car. She refrained from posing. She made no effort to appear beautiful. She appeared completely unaware of her own beauty. In the stillness of her gaze upon the mirror, there lay a profound truth, as if she were a stranger to her own image. That vulnerability transformed him in some way. He had encountered women adorned in diamonds and silk, women who possessed an uncanny ability to capture his gaze. Yet this girl, clad in worn jeans and bearing weary eyes, met his gaze effortlessly. As Emma vanished down the street, slipping from view, Edward remained seated, frozen in place, ensnared by an unnamed thought that lingered in his mind. He was unaware of her identity. He was uncertain about the significance she held. Yet, an internal transformation occurred within him. For the first time in ages, a sense of feeling washed over him, breaking through the haze of numbness. Emma's existence revolved around a carefully crafted schedule. She rose at 5:30, brewed a pot of inexpensive coffee, secured her hair back without glancing in the mirror, and strolled along the familiar, uneven sidewalk to the diner 6 blocks away. The structure bore the marks of age, its sign partially obscured, while the scent of charred toast hung in the air long after the doors had shut. Yet it was her responsibility, and beyond that, it was the sole constant in her life. She had been employed there for nearly 2 years, ever since she transitioned out of her final foster home. It lacked any sense of glamour. She cleaned the sticky booths, filled chipped mugs with thin coffee, and remained silent when customers referred to her as sweetheart, as if it were her actual name. Most evenings, following her shift, she boarded the bus that traversed the city to a small community college where she was gradually, and with great effort, pursuing a nursing degree. On certain nights, she would doze off on the bus, only to awaken and realize she had passed her stop. On certain evenings, she endured the class with sore feet and a hollow stomach. Yet she persevered. Not due to a belief in happy endings, but because inaction felt far more unbearable. Her past adhered to her as if it were an inseparable layer. When Emma was 13, her mother passed away from an overdose, right there on the floor of their one-bedroom apartment, which they shared with 2 other families. The recollection of reaching out for assistance, her hands trembling to the point of struggle with the phone, lingered in the recesses of her thoughts. Following that, there was the system, foster homes, temporary shelters, counselors who probed excessively, and foster parents more interested in the financial support than the well-being of the child. Emma was not one to offer her trust lightly. In truth, she didn't provide it at all. That's why, upon seeing the same black car cruise by the diner twice in one morning, a knot formed in her stomach. Initially, she believed it was merely a stroke of chance. A wealthy individual found himself disoriented. Perhaps a nearby business meeting. However, when she spotted the same sleek car once more that afternoon, parked across the street as she disposed of the trash in the back, her instincts heightened. She sensed the weight of someone's gaze upon her, though the reason for their scrutiny eluded her comprehension. She remained silent, offering no words to anyone at the diner. She simply didn't. She adjusted her ponytail, wrapped her hoodie snugly around her figure, and reminded herself to remain vigilant. Her reality was devoid of fairy tales or unexpected meetings that concluded on a positive note. From her perspective, individuals rarely entered your life without having an ulterior motive. And no one ever desired something without paying a price. She averted her gaze, maintained a steady pace, and concealed her heart in a place where no one could touch it. Regardless of whether someone was observing, or if a shift loomed on the horizon, Emma had come to understand long ago that hope could be perilous. It rendered you gentle. And gentle didn't endure. Edward had never been one to dwell on unfamiliar faces. His existence revolved around precision, organization, and diversion, with gatherings that seamlessly transitioned into additional gatherings, meticulously chosen social circles, planned conversations, and thoughtfully orchestrated presentations. Yet there was something about that girl, the way she gazed into the car window as if it were her sole reflection, that etched a place in his thoughts he couldn't dismiss. He found himself drawn back to that block repeatedly, not daily at the outset, but often enough to spark a sense of confusion about his purpose there. He informed his assistant that he required some time away from the office, asserting that he was exploring investment opportunities in urban renewal projects, despite his conviction against dishonesty. He simply preferred not to articulate what he found perplexing himself. Each time he passed that diner, he convinced himself it was merely curiosity. Yet, beneath the surface, he was aware of the truth. He was not observing the surroundings of the neighborhood. He observed her intently. On a quiet afternoon, he lingered in his parked car just down the block, the engine purring gently. The windows were shaded just enough to conceal him, yet not so opaque that he couldn't catch a glimpse of her through the glass. She emerged from the building clad in her uniform, black pants, a simple shirt adorned with a worn name tag, and pulled 2 hefty trash bags toward the alley. He observed the way she carried herself, as if she were accustomed to handling everything on her own, as though no one had ever extended a hand to assist her. In her painfully ordinary demeanor, he discovered an extraordinary essence that captivated him. Her lack of desire for attention only added to her remarkable presence. He instructed his driver, Marcus, to uncover her identity. Marcus remained silent, offering no questions. Throughout their time together, Edward had never made a request of this nature, and the man sensed intuitively that this transcended mere business. The following day, Marcus presented him with a compact file containing her name, her place of employment, and a concise background check. Edward was taken aback to discover the scarcity of what remained. No recognized relatives. Several foster homes. A student who studies part-time. Impeccable history. Serene existence. He had the option to send someone to speak with her, to set up an indirect approach, yet he chose not to engage in any manipulation. This was not what it seemed. He chose to step into the diner instead. Initially, he settled into the back corner and requested a cup of black coffee. She averted her gaze from him entirely. She topped off his cup, removed his plate, and cleaned the table beside him in silence. Yet, he remained. He returned the following day. And the following day. Perpetually positioned at that familiar table. Consistently choosing the same coffee. He observed her graceful management of impolite patrons, her gentle compassion towards the elderly gentleman who visited each Wednesday, and the way she navigated her surroundings with the poised demeanor of someone accustomed to remaining unnoticed. By the fourth visit, he discovered himself lingering, hoping for her to cast a glance his way, to recognize him in some subtle manner. Yet she never did. Strangely enough, that only pulled him nearer. She remained unfazed. She lacked curiosity. She was indifferent to his identity or the reasons behind his persistent appearances. Unbeknownst to him, Emma had been aware of his presence from the moment he first stepped inside. She observed every detail. She remained completely unresponsive. Responding required unlocking a barrier, and she never granted access to anyone. Not any longer. She was completely unaware of his identity, yet there was an unsettling quality about him that left her feeling uneasy. He exuded an unsettling tranquility, an immaculate appearance that felt entirely incongruous. And yet, there was an unmistakable familiarity in the way he gazed at her, as if he were on a quest for something he had once cherished. Unbeknownst to them, an irreversible change had already set in motion. By the fifth day, Emma had reached her breaking point. The familiar figure, the unchanged table, the ever-silent stares, it was beginning to eat away at her. She had faced many challenges in her life, and fear was not something that easily took hold of her. Yet, this situation felt unlike any other. He was neither unsettling nor aggressive, and he wasn't engaging in any inappropriate behavior. Perhaps that was what intensified the situation. He was merely there. Perpetually observing, silently remaining. She glided over to his table, coffee pot in hand, and topped off his half-empty cup without a word. Her voice lacked inflection, yet her eyes pierced through the stillness when she finally spoke. "Have you misplaced something in this area?" she inquired, maintaining an even tone. "For 5 consecutive days, you've remained in that very spot." The man raised his gaze to her gradually, a subtle smile playing at the edges of his lips, yet his eyes told a different story. Within them lay a weight, a stillness that sought understanding. "Perhaps," he remarked. "Perhaps I've discovered it." Emma rolled her eyes and began to walk away, yet the softness and sincerity in his voice, devoid of flirtation, caused her to pause. She cast a fleeting look behind her, as if compelled by an unseen force. He made no attempt to pursue her or utter another word. He took a slow sip of his coffee, gazing out the window as if anticipating an unnamed arrival. Later that day, as she took her brief respite outside, she spotted him casually leaning against the wall by the diner's entrance. He found himself without coffee, without a phone, and without any plans. With his hands tucked into his pockets, he wore that familiar, silent demeanor. "I'm not here to disturb you," he interjected before she had a chance to respond. "I simply... engaging in conversation with you brings me joy. Even if it were just a single sentence." Emma crossed her arms over her chest. "You're not familiar with who I am." "Indeed," he consented. "However, I would be inclined to." She shook her head, a smile creeping onto her face as amusement replaced any trace of annoyance. "That line likely resonates more in the area you hail from." "I didn't intend it as a pickup line." His voice was calm, raw. "I intended my words precisely as I expressed them." She observed him intently for a moment, caught between the possibility of his madness and the certainty of his obstinacy. He appeared trustworthy. He appeared unremarkable, just an individual who seemed oddly mismatched with his own visage. "Look," he said, stepping back. "Take your time. No games. If you ever find yourself in need of a breath of fresh air, I happen to know a spot close by that offers coffee far superior to what we have here." She raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "This coffee has been your companion all week long." He smiled, this time with genuine warmth illuminating his expression. "Precisely." That evening, she chose not to accompany him. Yet, she pondered over it. On the following day, when he returned and merely acknowledged her with a nod, she experienced an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't encountered in years, something akin to curiosity. After he asked for the third time, she finally agreed. Not due to her trust in him, nor from any desire for something he could provide, but rather because a quiet voice within her suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, not every threshold brought sorrow. Some doors merely opened to a breath of fresh air. Their initial stroll was serene. Not the sort of uncomfortable pause that demanded attention, but rather a more organic moment, as if two individuals were simply coexisting without the need for words. They wandered through a park merely a few blocks from the diner, where the trees hung low over the uneven paths and the benches bore the marks of countless seasons under the sun and rain. Emma remained quiet, and Edward chose not to press her. He appeared to grasp intuitively that any pressure would only push her further away. He strolled alongside her, his hands tucked into his pockets, stealing glances now and then to confirm her presence, to affirm her reality. When she finally opened her mouth, the words that emerged were anything but trivial. She inquired about his profession, and he paused for a moment. For a fleeting instant, he contemplated revealing the reality of his position, that he was the CEO of Montgomery Holdings, that he occupied the seat at the head of boardroom tables that remained unseen by most. Yet, there was an undeniable spark in her gaze that compelled him to choose another direction. He spoke with caution, recalling his past experience of running a company. At this moment, I'm attempting to recall who I was prior to that. It was not a fabrication, yet it also lacked the complete honesty. Emma appeared neither surprised nor curious. She merely nodded, as though she grasped the essence of losing fragments of oneself throughout the journey. In the following weeks, their strolls turned into a familiar ritual. They never intended for them to happen. He would linger outside the diner after her shift, silent and patient, and if she felt inclined, she would step out to join him. Otherwise, he would just give a nod and walk away. That was the agreement. Take your time. There are no inquiries. Only existence. As they strolled, she began to share more of herself. Not in a rush, but gradually, bit by bit, as if one were gauging the heft of a sealed container before relinquishing the key. She recounted the first night she spent in a foster home, describing how she had kept her shoes on while sleeping, uncertain if she might need to flee at any moment. She recounted her days spent in the library, poring over medical textbooks due to the lack of internet access and funds for classes. She shared the story of how she once saved a neighbor from an overdose, a pivotal moment that ignited her passion for nursing. Her voice carried a serene quality as she spoke, as if she had discovered long ago that pain must be treated with the utmost care, like fragile glass, or not addressed at all. Edward absorbed the words around him, allowing silence to fill the spaces between thoughts. When he spoke, his words strayed far from the realms of wealth, influence, or commerce. He recounted the story of his brother, lost in a car accident during their teenage years, reflecting on how their parents ceased to see one another in the aftermath, and how the stillness of their grand home resonated more profoundly than any shout. He described success as an endless ascent up a mountain, where each achievement only deepened his sense of emptiness rather than filling it. And how she, this girl from nowhere, grounded him with a sense of stability he hadn't felt in years. In those initial days, there was an absence of romance, devoid of any touching or flirting. Two souls gradually revealing their battered pasts beneath the soft glow of streetlights and the stillness of the night sky. Yet, beneath the surface, a profound essence was taking shape, grounded in reality rather than illusion. Emma was cautious with her trust, and Edward understood that completely. Yet with each stroll, each moment of quiet companionship, each sincere expression, the barriers she had meticulously constructed started to waver, if only a little. For the first time in ages, she pondered whether it was feasible to be recognized, not as a weight, not as an undertaking, but simply as who she truly was. On a Thursday evening, the atmosphere was thick with the anticipation of rain. They had ventured further than they typically did, arriving at a serene vantage point overlooking the city, where the lights twinkled like far-off stars. Emma perched on a low concrete wall, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of tea purchased from a street vendor, and for the first time in weeks, she appeared at ease. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her gaze wasn't sweeping the horizon for dangers. She appeared serene, or perhaps nearly so. Edward had contemplated this moment for days on end. The truth weighed on him like a boulder, and with every glance in her direction, its burden intensified. He had convinced himself that he required more time, that she wasn't prepared to understand, but deep down he recognized that was a falsehood. The more he withheld it from her, the deeper the sense of betrayal would grow. He inhaled deeply and began to speak, lacking the usual confidence he possessed, instead revealing a sense of quiet vulnerability. "There's a secret I've kept from you," he said, observing how her gaze intensified immediately. "Something significant. Concerning my identity." Emma remained still, yet her stance shifted subtly. Nuanced. Protective. She set the cup down next to her on the wall, arms crossed, yet remained silent. "My name is Edward Montgomery," he went on. "I am the owner of Montgomery Holdings. It is large. Likely a company you've come across, yet its leadership remains a mystery to you. I arrived at that diner with purpose. One morning, I caught a glimpse of you and felt compelled to return, driven by a desire to uncover your identity." The ensuing silence was absolute. The leaves remained utterly still, untouched by even the faintest whisper of wind. Emma remained silent, her eyes unblinking. For a fleeting instant, he questioned whether she was drawing breath at all. She rose at last, with careful intention, and stepped back 2 paces from him. Her face didn't display anger, not yet, but there was a depth in her eyes that hinted at something more intense than mere anger. Disillusionment. Separation. Was this all just a game? She inquired, her tone measured and steady. "You chose to enter my life simply out of boredom." Negative. "Emma, it wasn't as you think. Refrain from." She snapped, and in an instant, the tranquility vanished. "Do not utter my name as if you possessed the authority to do so." He attempted to clarify. He expressed to her that none of it had been part of his plans, that he had never anticipated feeling anything at all, and that encountering her had transformed him in ways he struggled to articulate. Yet, she had stopped paying attention. Her gaze was entirely elsewhere. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from that well-known urge, to flee. "I let you in," she whispered, almost as if the words were meant for her own ears more than his. "I refrain from doing that. I keep my distance from others. I understand. I had no desire to deceive." "But you did," she stated, her tone now devoid of emotion. "You observed me. You discovered my identity without needing to inquire. That lacks sincerity. That is mastery." He extended his hand, not to seize her, merely to bridge the distance, yet she retreated once more, and the expression on her face caused a pang in his heart. She remarked, "I believed you were a person similar to me. Yet you're merely another affluent individual toying with something beyond your grasp." And then she vanished. She kept moving forward. She left him no opportunity to pursue her. In an instant, she found herself poised against the backdrop of the shimmering city lights. What lingered next was the paper cup, perched on the wall, slowly succumbing to the chill of the night. 4 weeks passed, and Emma vanished. She didn't merely cease responding to texts or overlook his calls, she disappeared entirely. The number she had dialed was no longer in service. Her presence on social media, however minimal, had vanished completely. She had vanished from the diner, and when Edward inquired with the manager, he received nothing more than a shrug and a terse, "She quit." No forwarding address, no reason given. She had completely vanished, and she had executed it flawlessly. Initially, Edward convinced himself to honor her choice. He had caused her pain, even if it was not on purpose, and she was completely justified in choosing to leave. Yet every morning, he rose with the hope of seeing her name light up his phone, and every night, he lay awake pondering her whereabouts. It wasn't remorse that lingered in his mind, it was the void. The absence she created resonated more profoundly than any conflict they might have faced. He returned to the street where their paths had first crossed, the uneven pavement and that weathered, reflective car window that had set everything in motion. He parked nearby, sitting in silence, contemplating how a seemingly insignificant moment could evolve into something so monumental. He discovered himself revisiting their strolls, lingering at the intersections where they had stopped, resting on the bench where she had once shared her story about helping her neighbor. He echoed her words in his mind repeatedly, and with each reflection, he understood more deeply how much of her trust had been founded on honesty, a principle he had breached, albeit unintentionally. He felt compelled to pen her a letter. Neither an email nor a text. Something more deliberate, something genuine. Indeed, he did. He positioned himself at the kitchen table in his penthouse, a space that had never seemed so empty, and began to write with a pen as if it had been ages since he last did so. His handwriting wavered, and the words flowed with difficulty, yet he persevered until the page was completely covered. He never requested her return. He refrained from making commitments. He finally revealed the truth to her, sharing all the words he had held back when the opportunity was there. He observed her initially because he was perplexed by the emotions stirring within him. He had withheld the truth and felt the weight of that decision with each passing day. Meeting her had been the sole moment in his life that felt genuine and unplanned, and regardless of whether she ever forgave him, he would forever hold on to the part of himself she had helped him uncover. He sent the letter to the only location that came to mind, the dilapidated apartment complex on the other side of town where Marcus had previously followed the trail of her roommate's name. There was no assurance she would receive it, no certainty that it would ever find its way to her. Yet, it was the sole strand remaining for him. Time flowed on. Then a week passed. Next, another one. Silence prevails. No indication. As the evening descended and the sun dipped below the horizon, Edward found himself returning to the very spot where it all started, the sidewalk where she had casually adjusted her tank top in the car's reflection, blissfully unaware of the eyes that were upon her. He settled onto a nearby bench, hands neatly folded, devoid of expectations, simply existing in the moment. She was absent. He lingered until the streetlights flickered on and the shadows stretched out like whispers in the dusk. Just as he was on the verge of departing, a gentle sound of footsteps reached his ears from behind. He hesitated before turning. He was hesitant to embrace hope too quickly. Yet, her voice emerged, soft yet unwavering. "Your letter has arrived." He rose gradually, his heart pounding fiercely, creating a tightness in his chest. She stood just a few feet away, her hoodie drawn tightly around her face, as if it were a shield. Her gaze was enigmatic, yet she remained steadfast. "Not at this moment. I wasn't sure if I should come," she remarked. "Yet, I also didn't wish to vanish completely." He gave a slight nod. "I'm pleased you chose not to." A heavy silence enveloped them, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. She took a single step forward, and that was all it took. He remained silent, making no move towards her. He simply lingered, just as he had when they began their journey together, step by step. Without uttering a single word, she settled beside him on the bench, her arms wrapped around her knees. At this moment, that sufficed. A year had passed, and the city bore a new visage. Perhaps it was the familiar cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, the rusted fire escapes and distant sirens, but to Emma, everything seemed to carry a newfound lightness, as if the very air had transformed. She strolled along the familiar streets, her steps imbued with a confidence she never imagined she would possess. Her scrubs bore the creases of a long shift at the clinic, yet she wore them with a sense of pride. The name inscribed on her chest now read, Emma Reed, RN, and each time she caught sight of it, even unintentionally, a tiny fragment of her began to mend. The clinic occupied a corner of a block that had previously been lined with forsaken structures and vacant shops. Children frolicked on the sidewalks as parents hovered nearby, some awaiting complimentary checkups while others simply engaged in conversation. Within, the walls radiated inviting hues, far from the coldness of sterile white, and the team addressed one another by their first names. It wasn't merely a clinic, it was a sanctuary forged from the essence of second chances. Edward had divested a segment of Montgomery Holdings to finance the whole endeavor. It was neither a grand display nor a bid to demonstrate anything. He had acted on his conviction in her aspirations, liberated from the notion that achievement was defined by towering buildings and fluctuating numbers. For the first time in his life, his wealth seemed to serve a purpose rather than conceal his true self. Their relationship was far from a fairy tale. Arguments erupted, long nights were filled with uncertainty, and there were days when silence lingered between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Yet, there was also development, meaningful apologies, and a trust that was cultivated gradually, with careful intention. Emma retained her instincts and her caution, yet she had moved beyond merely existing in a state of survival. And Edward had mastered the art of listening, truly absorbing every word rather than merely hearing. They encountered one another in a space of growth, not in flawlessness, but in the journey of becoming. No grand announcement was ever made. The proposal lacked any grand gestures or sparkling gems nestled in luxurious packaging. One evening, nestled on the couch with takeout boxes scattered around and a documentary softly playing in the background, Emma glanced over and remarked, "I'm not going anywhere, you know." He smiled, leaned in, and whispered, "Good. For I would have pursued you to the ends of the earth." At times, they strolled by the spot where she had previously utilized his car window as a reflective surface. The structure remained the same, yet each time they walked by, Emma would steal a glance at that place and chuckle softly, shaking her head in amusement. As I adjusted my shirt, she would smile, finding humor in the ridiculousness of the moment. There I was, simply sitting there, evading the reality of my existence, he would respond. That mirror had a knack for timing that surpassed both of us. There was no need for them to feign that everything had come effortlessly. The allure of their narrative lay not in its perfection, but in the authenticity it had achieved. They hailed from contrasting realms, bore unique scars, and crossed paths in the most unforeseen manner. Yet, against all expectations, they had created something resilient, something neither had ever truly imagined possible. And at times, when Emma glimpsed her reflection in a window, she no longer recognized the girl who once recoiled from her own stare. She beheld a figure grounded, cherished, a soul who had at last returned to their rightful place. The allure of this conclusion, in my view, resides in its subtlety. It lacks the loudness of fairy tale perfection or the spectacle of cinematic fireworks, and that's precisely what makes it feel authentic. Emma and Edward's tale isn't centered on salvation, it's focused on acknowledgement. Two individuals from vastly contrasting realms transcended appearances and social standings, moving beyond fear and pride to uncover the neglected and healing aspects of one another that had been hidden for far too long. The strength of the ending lies not in their union, but in the journey to it, marked by gradual forgiveness, confronting uncomfortable truths, and the daunting choice to embrace vulnerability after years of fortifying barriers. Emma didn't succumb to opulence, and Edward didn't forsake his realm. They both transformed, not for one another, but as a result of one another. It's a love story, indeed, but not one where everything is effortlessly resolved. It's the type where all aspects are confronted. In that moment, it transforms into something enduring.